Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Telit webinar, Understanding the Results of the FCC's CBRS PAL auction. I'm Amanda Slink, the Head of Global Events here at Telit, and I will be moderating today's event. Before we start, we'd like to gauge an idea of how you best describe your CBRS or Private LTE IoT projects. So if you could, please take just a second to fill out our poll question, which you should see on your screen now. Now let's get to know our speakers. To explain this topic today, I am pleased to be joined by three speakers. First, we have Safi Khan, Regional Product Marketing Director at Telit. Second, we have Nick Talua, Head of Sales and Field Operations at Sequans. And third, we have Dave Wright, President at the CBRS Alliance. Just before I hand it over to Safi to start the presentation, I have a few quick reminders. I would like to encourage our audience to interact by posting questions. We will have time to answer some of these at the end of the presentation. Simply submit a question by posting in the box to the right of the slides. Also, please be sure to check out the resources section in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for some additional information. Finally, we will send out the presentation slides and a replay link to all attendees at the conclusion of the webinar. And with that, Safi, I will hand it to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. My name is Safi Khan from Telit, and I'm a Regional Product Marketing Director based in San Diego. And today I'll be talking to you about a few exciting things that are happening in the industry, specifically about the CBRS PAL auctions that recently concluded and were conducted by the FCC. And then I'll give an overview, high level, of the CBRS ecosystem and the architecture of the network, just to educate some of the folks who are eager to learn about this new and exciting space in private LTE networking. And then I'll touch a little bit on some of the products that Telit is offering that support private LTE CBRS networks. So as I said, the FCC had an auction called Auction 105, and it recently concluded. And the big surprise was how much interest there was in the industry to bid for this auction. So we decided to put this webinar together specifically for this reason, that there was $4.5 or almost $4.6 billion that were raised as a result of this auction. And this has created a lot of excitement and opened up new avenues for businesses to basically explore deploying cellular networks into new use cases and newcomers, smaller companies have now a chance to enter this market. So let's get started with a little bit of overview of the results of the bidding that I will touch on. And then Dave Wright, who is the president of the CBRS Alliance, will also come back and give you an insight from the CBRS Alliance itself on further details on the bidders, the winners, and what it means to the industry. So with that, let's get right into it. And the first slide that I want to show you is the map of the United States, where it's color-coded to show you basically how that $4.6 billion is really distributed across the country. And what's shown here is that this is the price. So essentially what you can see is, of course, in some of the popular large markets, color is red, which is, indicating that these were heavily bid on, and in multiple rounds, the price of the auction went up significantly. So as you can see the scale, it's basically in dollars. And so, for example, if you look at some of the red spots, you can see that the price for a 10 megahertz spectrum went. And then in some of the other areas, the low end, you could see that the same 10 megahertz spectrum in another county of the country is $1,000 to $10,000. So there's a varied mix here, but as you can see, it was heavily bid on. All counties were bid on, and like I said, the total raise was $4.6 billion. And then another interesting fact is that the way that the value of the spectrum is measured is in a unit called dollars per megahertz per pop. And what that means is, per unit user of the spectrum in a megahertz, the unit of the frequency, how much was it? So it's more of a normalized number. And the average is 22 cents per megahertz per pop. And basically, like I said, the smaller license area offered lower entry prices. And so this gives the ability for some of the smaller companies to enter this market. And then there is, this availability of the dynamic spectrum sharing, which I will cover in terms of how the CBRS system works, and the new business use cases that will open up with private LTE, fixed wireless access. There were a total of 271 companies who started the bidding. Eventually, it was down to 257 bidders. And then eventually 228 licensees basically were awarded the licenses. So now in the same spirit, let's take a look at the same map, but now take a look at it from another angle. Now this chart is showing the number of bidders per county. And again, as you can see, there are hotspots, which are red. And here, the maximum number of bidders reached as high as 11, and which means there was fierce competition, and that is what drove the prices of the spectrum high. There are markets that attracted the largest number of bidders, like again, Los Angeles, because I live in San Diego, I'll pick on LA. LA was very popular, got the attention of the largest number of bidders. But surprisingly, even there are rural areas like Iowa, Ohio, places like that, they also attracted very high number of bidders. And, there were the usual mobile network operators, Verizon and Dish and T-Mobile, and also the cable operators. So they were bidding for big markets like LA, Orange County, and even San Diego. And also, interestingly, there was a large presence of utility companies like San Diego Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison. So these players are entering this market with the hope that they can acquire this spectrum and then maybe operate a more secure private network of their own so that they don't have to rely on someone else. There were also many new players like B Wireless or 10-4. For example, Iowa, we saw the presence of several regional or fixed wireless providers, including NextLink, Western Iowa Networks, Michigan Wireless, Atlantic Telit Network, etc. So this is really good for the ecosystem and the industries where the CBRS Alliance and this auction is opening the space up for fair competition, and new entrants are getting an opportunity to deploy networks. So let's dig a little more deeper into who are the winners. So as kind of already expected, the mobile network operators came out as big winners. No surprise there. Verizon, Dish, T-Mobile. Interestingly, AT&T was absent from the auction, so they may be more aggressive in the upcoming C-band auction that will happen in December for the same mid-band spectrum. So let's go through them one by one. Let's talk about Verizon first. And as you can see, they won pretty big. They spent almost $2 billion. So their approach to the spectrum acquisition was very focused. They did not bid everywhere. They bid on limited number of counties where there were major urban areas. They focused their approach where they received at least 3 carriers, and I'll get into that. But basically, they wanted to make sure they have a wider spectrum that they could acquire so that you can get higher speed, more capacity, and basically they were very active in the whole process and came out on top. Next was Dish Network, which was very interesting. So if you may or may not know, Dish Network has been awarded all of the cellular prepaid subscribers as part of the T-Mobile and Sprint merger. Boost Mobile, which used to be part of Sprint, all those subscribers now Dish acquired, and they are in the process of basically getting into mobile service. So they also were active. They tried to get at least one carrier in every county. So they were a different or opposite approach to Verizon. They wanted to go broad and everywhere, even if they don't get the 3 carriers or 4. And so they currently don't have the infrastructure, but they have some of the subscribers. So they are a growing player, and it will be interesting to keep an eye on them. And, with the low power requirements of CBRS and the existing holdings, and also this will be a greenfield network, it really will be very interesting on how they deploy or what is their network deployment strategy to compete with others. They did, spend almost $1 billion also. So again, this shows the excitement and the seriousness of these companies to acquire the spectrum. And then T-Mobile, as Sprint and T-Mobile have merged, they have become, I think now the second largest operator in the U.S. And their basically strategy was to bid opportunistically. So they are not like Verizon or Dish. And then they basically got limited number of licenses and only in a few counties. And they did not appear to be bidding very seriously. And the reason for that is that they already own a significant portion of mid-band spectrum, which is, coming from Sprint, legacy Sprint, and also T-Mobile's own spectrum holdings. And then, interestingly, they are going to be acquiring another operator, Shenandoah Telecom, or Shentel. And so they actually relied on them to do most of the bidding because they will be acquiring them. So that's how they will acquire more of the CBRS spectrum through that acquisition. So that's the landscape from the mobile network operators' point of view, and very, very interesting results. Let's move over to the next category, which is the cable mobile virtual network operators. So cable companies traditionally were providing cable service, but recently they have all realized that, the opportunity is in bundling voice service, cable, internet service, television service, and the fourth one, which is very important, is to offer a mobile service. So they were an MVNO, and they used to rely on the bigger Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile to be a mobile virtual network operator. But basically, this spectrum auction allowed them to bid for this spectrum and have their own opportunity to deploy a network where they could do an offload of the user instead of Wi-Fi. So Comcast, for example, has many Wi-Fi assets, and they do use that to offload customers when possible. And with CBRS spectrum and coverage, they will be able to do an offload on their own network. So Comcast Xfinity is the nation's largest cable operator. They have a broadband footprint which spans 39 states, and they have a subscriber base of 27 million households. And they have also 2.4 million wireless subscribers, which are basically, so basically they can attract customers from the other mobile network operators because of offering the bundle deal. And so they walked away with a good amount of spectrum, and they spent about $500 million. So again, very active player, good price per megahertz per pop, and so it will be interesting to see what they do. Next up is Charter, which is also known as Spectrum, and they are also pretty big. They have a coverage of 52 million homes, and they have 25 million high-speed broadband subscribers. And then on the wireless side, they have 1.4 million subscribers. So these guys, again, they also spent about the same amount, $500 million on their spectrum holdings, and to cover many counties. Their price per megahertz was higher than Comcast. So it'll be also good to keep an eye on what Charter does. Cox is one of the smaller players, but they were also bidding $200 million. And they do have about 3.5 million broadband customers, so much smaller than the other two, but still growing. And they were also active in the bidding. So one interesting thing that happens, which is evident on this map, is, as it's color-coded, that these guys keep out of the other person's territory. And so as you can see, it's mostly or almost mutually exclusive. And that's, how, like, when you are applying for or looking for an internet service, you may only have limited options. So that's how it's set up. And so basically they bid on the counties where they are mostly they have the subscribers. And so basically then once they build out their networks, they will be able to offer their subscribers a very good strategy for providing mobile service. And one of the interesting things is, their strategy will be to use, how there are multiple SIM technologies in the phones today, like, for example, the flagship phones from Google, Samsung, Apple. They all can now support two SIMs. And by using the dual SIM, they can also basically offer the service seamlessly fall back on the MVNO network if they come into the coverage. And that way they can save on the data charges. All right, so this was my introductory overview of the PAL auction spectrum results. And then Dave will come back later and complete the story with the insights from the CBRS Alliance. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about private LTE and what is it all about, why is it important? Because I think it's evident from the spectrum results that this is an ecosystem that is rapidly growing and very viable. So what is it? So it's basically a dedicated network for an enterprise separated from the wide area macro network. So a private LTE network is used for specific IoT applications and services. It targets specific verticals, for example, like mining, industrial manufacturing, like warehouses, automotive manufacturing is very big into this. Utilities, I already mentioned, metering, all the smart meters, logistics, transportation, smart cities, and hospitals, enterprises, and also university campuses and stadiums or any venue. So it can be operated by any mobile operator or even a private company. Like we saw, many new incumbents will be they already bid and they will be deploying some networks. And the spectrum could be licensed or unlicensed or shared. So in the case of CBRS, it is the shared spectrum that we will talk about today. And then, of course, it will evolve into private 5G. It's a natural evolution that will happen, and it will bring all of the benefits of 5G to some of these verticals, especially the ultra-low latency and the high reliability and high speeds of 5G. Security is, of course, the most important aspect, where we have heard the stories of Wi-Fi hacking, vulnerabilities in Wi-Fi. Hackers love to basically find ways to attack Wi-Fi. So cellular end-to-end is more secure than Wi-Fi. It's enterprise security built from the ground up. So when enterprises and industrial manufacturing complexes or city infrastructure, mission critical, they want to upgrade their security, then they look towards cellular LTE because it brings a higher level of end-to-end security. But the public cellular LTE from the mobile operators, it costs much more than, for example, Wi-Fi. There's no cost for Wi-Fi, but there is cost of connectivity data plan for cellular. So the CBRS and private LTE brings a new dimension to this, where this can basically offer a lower cost alternative for the enterprises and industrial sectors to have another connectivity option. In terms of latency, also, in a private LTE network or 5G network, the data doesn't have to travel all the way back to a core network of a large operator, like a data center could be far away. It stays on premises, or it can stay on premises if they choose to. This is one of the advantages of private LTE. So it can also help reduce the latency as a side effect. So all the network is basically on premises, and you can tightly control through IT how much latency the system will have. And that's well suited for smart manufacturing, like, for example, robotics that need very low latency, wire replacement in machines that need instant on-off button capabilities, medical science, many other verticals. So many of the factories are looking at this to improve their efficiency. And then, just generally connectivity. So we're seeing this interest in moving the legacy LMR or land mobile radio telephony to modern LTE network systems. So the VoIP calls and the VoLTE calls are basically taking over the legacy landlines. And this is very popular in public safety and first responders. And they're looking at these options to reduce their operating costs. So of course, the private LTE can offer the good mix of indoor and outdoor operation, which Wi-Fi could not, especially outdoors or longer range. So that's one of the reasons why it's very useful to look at private LTE as an option. So let's keep going deeper and deeper into explaining from a high level, what are we talking about in terms of CBRS. So it's the mid-band spectrum, and that's basically 3.5 to 3.7 gigahertz allocated by the FCC, and it's available for commercial uses. It used to be the U.S. Navy radar and on the coastline. And the idea is to have a system that can sense the radar, and it's very rare nowadays. So when the radar is in operation, you have to shut down the rest of the service. That's a small cost to pay, because when the Navy is not using that spectrum, then it becomes available. And there are two tiers. for that availability, as I will get into. Again, I emphasize the low cost and rapidly deployable network. So the idea is to put up a network very quickly versus the legacy deployment of a network where you have to run a lot of infrastructure. Here, it's basically packaged into a smaller scale, or it could also be a larger scale, but not at the scale of the public carrier network. All the benefits already I kind of covered, and the applications are the ones that are really important: large industrial, oil and gas, the mining, the manufacturing, robotics, etc. So we'll talk about them as we go along. So again, there are many components of the network here, and let's go into each one slightly more to explain. So the spectrum, as I said, has 3 tiers. So the incumbent is the Navy, and there are some fixed satellite operators also. And then the priority access license, or called PAL, this is the license that was auctioned, and I discussed the results of the PAL auction. And then the GAA is the free, or the basically the shared access, which is almost like Wi-Fi, but more has the benefits of cellular technology. So this basically allows the whole ecosystem to coexist, and not stomp on each other, in the sense that there is infrastructure components that are built into the system that will sense who gets the chance to go and transmit versus who has to wait. And many architectures are defined in the CBRS on-go service specification. Okay, so what does the CBRS, or a private LTE network, look like? Let's take a look at some of these components shown here on this slide with some graphics. And there are some acronyms, so I'll try to cover these as well. But basically, this is showing the different network components of on-go. Basically, CBRS stands for a Citizens Band Radio Service. And it's basically an alliance of companies that is working to define the rules that make the use of this shared spectrum more efficient and functional. And the way the system works is, excuse me, there are multiple users of the spectrum, and some of them have high priority because they have purchased the PAL license over others who are basically general access users. And then above both of these is the incumbent Navy radar. So there's a system called SAS, or SAS, stands for Spectrum Access System. And there are 5 companies now that are authorized to be SAS providers. Companies like Federated Wireless, CommScope, Google, and a couple of others. So these companies will basically ensure that no one transmits when the Navy radar, especially on the coastline, is transmitting. And the way they do that is by deploying this thing called ESC, and that stands for the Environmental Sensing Controller. And basically, it's basically a radio that's listening to the radar, and as soon as it senses the radar being active, it can control all of the devices through the SAS, because all the devices are talking to the SAS and getting permission to transmit. And this is basically how the system works. Now, CBSD is a CBRS device, and then CBSD Class A and Class B is basically 2 classes of devices defined in the on-go service. A Class A transmits at a lower power, and it's mainly meant for indoor, like a small cell. And then the Class B is transmitting at a much higher power and is meant for outdoor. It's like a small cell equivalent from the cellular world. On the right, we show 2 scenarios for a private LTE network. One on the top is like a self-contained private LTE network. This could be for a particular venue, like a stadium or something like that, industrial setting or logistics hub. Could just even be an office or an enterprise setting. So we are seeing very strong demand for private LTE network in this scenario. And then the second option on the bottom is another model where a neutral host can provide cellular coverage for both the private and the public LTE networks. And again, this model is a service provider, works well if the network operators, for example, the bigger ones, they want to extend their coverage into specific venues, but they don't want to invest their own infrastructure, so they can partner with a neutral host entity. So this is how the CBRS system works, and with this system and now the PAL auctions in hand, we are now going to see a very rapid deployment and growth of these new kind of networks. I quickly want to touch on this private cellular network convergence vision. So basically, we have seen that the CBRS Alliance on-go service is a fully developed ecosystem, and it has already gained its critical mass. And now basically the service for private LTE is bringing this convergence of these three aspects. So for example, first we have the low end with LTE category 4, category 6 devices. They can typically achieve 100 to 200 megabits downlink speed. And then these are very good for IoT connectivity for any kind of use case. A USB dongle, for example, can be built with these products and embedded into the portable device or any IoT sensor. Then we have the mid-end with LTE category 12 and above. These can typically achieve about 500 megabits per second. They are very good for broadband connectivity and also providing mission critical and enterprise, especially in indoor, outdoor mixed environments for first responders or enterprises. And of course, lastly, we have the high end with 5G that is also now going to be rolled out with the CBRS spectrum. And that will bring low latency and higher speed, especially for mission critical systems and manufacturing and so on. And Telit offers modules in all three categories, and today we will cover the specific to the modules in the low end. And with that, I just want to touch on the product landscape that Telit offers in this space. So we do have a category 18 mini PCIe card called the LM960A18. And so this can do all of the mobile spectrum, mobile network operator band, plus the CBRS band 42, 43, and band 48. And overall, this is a global SKU certified with all the major operators around the globe. And you can get 1.2 gigabits per second downlink and 150 megabits per second uplink. And you can also use it for CBRS band. We also have a CBRS only product, the LM960A9. This one has band 42, 43, and 48 only. And this is a category 9 LTE modem. So this can be used for basically broadband routers, gateways in a high end. And then this one is what we will talk about today. So we announced recently these two modules, the LE9 15A A4 and A6, and these are based on the Sequans chip for category 4 and category 6. And these are also CBRS only devices, so they cover bands 42, 43, and 48. And this is what I was talking about in terms of the low-end IoT devices where these modules are a very good fit. And then we do have upcoming couple of M.2 modules that will be LTE category 6 and LTE category 12. Mobile network operator bands, as well as CBRS bands. So this is the Telit product portfolio, and let me focus slightly more on the two modules that we just announced. So these are the key features of the LE915AX series. So the AX means A4 is a category 4 and A6 is a category 6. So basically these are very cost-effective compact modules for the private LTE market. And this is based on the Cassiopeia chipset, which my colleague or my friend from Sequans, Nick, will cover. And basically the size is very compact. And we offer the embedded TCP/IP stack, SMS support, and they are fully industrial temperature range. So this is the end of my section of the presentation. And at the end, I will come back when there is Q&A, and I will be happy to answer any questions you guys have. And so with that, that's the conclusion of my presentation. This is showing the overall product roadmap in terms of price versus category. And I already talked about all of these modules. And so Telit offers basically low end to high end, depending on our customer's need. Okay, so with that, I hand it over to Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Safi. So I'm Nick Kaluja from Sequans, and let me quickly start by giving you a high-level overview of Sequans. So Sequans as a company is a semiconductor company, and we build chips, and we're focused mainly on non-smartphone applications targeted towards fixed wireless access, mobile hotspots, and those kinds of applications. There are two areas we focus on. We call them massive IoT and broadband IoT, as you see on the slide here. The massive IoT segment is basically focused on low-power battery-operated devices, and then the broadband IoT is really focused on the high-performance products, if you will. We've been in business since 2003 as a company, and we have delivered about 6 unique generations of LTE chips, and today we're on our 7th generation of LTE. The biggest value proposition for CBRS networks that Sequans offers is obviously we have, as Safi mentioned earlier, we have the Cat 4 and Cat 6 offering that is actually OnGo certified today. And together with Telit, we've delivered a very low-cost CBRS module to the market that will, in turn, drive low-cost devices and help accelerate the adoption of CBRS. The second part about our strength, which is very important here, is we have 100% complete ownership of our product from chipset all the way down to the protocol stack. And why this is important is because it allows us to really customize our product offering for many of the private LTE networks. So when we go in and we start talking to customers about what they need, how they need, there's always something unique that each customer wants us to do or something different that they want us to do. With our focus being on non-smartphones and our focus being predominantly on low power, fixed wireless access and those kinds of applications, we can actually deliver customizations very, very fast for many of these customers. So just to give you an idea of our history when it comes to CBRS, we have a very, very rich history. So when it comes to CBRS, even though CBRS is new in the United States, the very first part of our company, when I said in 2003 we were founded, we focused on WiMAX. And if anyone knows WiMAX, WiMAX is based on TDD. And that's where the company's foundation was based. And TDD is the underlying basis for CBRS. So we have actually been delivering TDD-based solutions since 2005, 2009 timeframe, where we delivered 3 generations of chips with TDD. So our stack is actually extremely mature. It was also deployed in the very first HTC 4G phone. If for those of you who remember, Sprint launched WiMAX in the United States, And the very first phone, which was the HTC phone, was based on a Sequans WiMAX chipset, 4G WiMAX chipset, which just shows you the credibility and the maturity of the TDD stack that we've been developing for such a long time. But in that time, we've also found significant success in deploying these TDD solutions on the 3.5 gigahertz frequency in many of the developing countries around the world for fixed wireless applications. So the same chipset was deployed in many fixed wireless applications. Then as the world turned from WiMAX to LTE and over time, from 2012 to 2018, we transitioned all those customers who were with us to LTE, and not just in LTE TDD, but also LTE FDD, which is the basis of LTE in the United States, or at least it was. And we supported all these customers to transition with us using the 3.5 gigahertz frequency worldwide and using the Sequans LTE solutions and further maturing the TDD stack that we've had. So if you look at the history of Sequans and you look at what we've done, we've been in 3.5 gigahertz for more than 10 years. We've been in TDD for our entire foundation, if you will. Now, outside the United States, 3.5 gigahertz is band 42 and band 43. And Safi kind of alluded to band 42, 43 in some of the modules that they have. And the US, band 42 and band 43 collectively is called band 48 CBRS. And so all these solutions that we've provided actually, with the chipset that we're providing, surpass the nearest competitor in terms of maturity by a very significant margin. If I go a little bit further, and I'm not going to go through the details of the chipset and the products here, but really the Telit CBRS LE915AX modules that Safi introduced earlier are actually based on the Sequans Cassiopeia chipset shown here. As I said before, the chipset is available both in Cat 4 and Cat 6 variants. And the unique part about the chipset is, even though they are different chips, you see the 3220, which is Cat 6, and the 3220SC, which is Cat 4, right in the title. The software between the two chips is identical, and they use the same RFIC. So that has allowed Telit to rapidly bring to market these two modules, the Cat 4 and Cat 6 modules. This chipset, even though we're talking here predominantly about band 48 and CBRS, the chipset actually supports both FDD and TDD operation. It has an integrated ACPU, so we can host various applications on the ACPU. For example, you see the VoLTE and the E911, those can be embedded. It comes with a very rich set of interfaces that you see out there, and features and temperature compliance, which goes from -40°C to +85°C, which makes it an ideal fit for many of the industrial and field deployments, if you will. And in addition to the CBRS frequency support, which is the 3.5 gigahertz, you can see in the middle there, the RFIC of this chipset has a very wide frequency range. And it has been deployed by many of the MNOs all over the world. If I go to the next slide, and this basically builds on that just to show you where the chipset has been deployed, where Sequans chipsets have been deployed. And you can see from carriers like Sprint, Verizon, T-Mobile, all the way to carriers in Japan, Korea, Australia, and many parts of Europe and all over the world, this has been deployed. It is a testament to the maturity of the solution you're getting from Sequans and Telit here. Specifically for TDD and the 3.5 gigahertz frequency, you see some of the boxes there in blue, and this highlights where the Sequans chipset has been deployed in the 3.5 gigahertz network. So places like ExploreNet in Canada, in Europe you see Linkem, Imagine in Australia at the very bottom right corner you see NBN, And so there are many other places in Middle East and Asia where these chipsets have been deployed, also in the 3.5 GHz networks. What you do not see on the map is deployments relative to private networks. And what Safi introduced earlier was talking about private CBRS networks. And those are very significant. And the Sequans chipset has been actually deployed in many of the private networks, which we cannot mention here, but it is something we excel in. We believe that some of the most aggressive and fastest deployments will come in this space. Many of the cable operators, the small rural operators, will add to the list of carriers, list of people who provide this service that we see moving aggressively with CBRS deployments. In terms of some of the use cases, so as I said, Sequans has been in this business for a very long time, and we're seeing some very early use cases on the CBRS, and predominantly in the past, at least when I say in the past, over the last year and a half while we've been doing this in the United States, most of the use cases we see on the CBRS side have been heavily focused on education, utilities, and fixed wireless access. We've had some active discussions with several school districts here in the United States that are actively working to deploy private LTE for distance learning. And in this day and age, that has become a very, very hot market for us, which is the education market. As Safi also mentioned earlier, there are multiple utilities, not just in South California, but other places that have bought spectrum as part of the CBRS PAL auction. And some of these utilities, by the way, are already using private networks today. And they plan to use CBRS to continue further their reach using the licenses that they have bought. Today, there are more than a dozen companies that are deploying solutions on Sequans CBRS. I have some examples here. So Multitac on the top right corner has deployed a small USB-based device using Cat6 CBRS. Their strong focus is on the education and public utility segments. On the extreme left-hand side, you see Aris, now called CommScope. They have a Cat6 gateway based on Sequans. They have traditionally been a very strong partner of the cable operators, and they have a very strong interest in fixed wireless access. And then you see other names like Cambium Networks, Blink, Telrad. All these guys are basically have CPEs, outdoor units, indoor units, those kinds of equipment that again use Sequans as a basis for their fixed wireless access deployments. Recently, and this is just as of late, we started seeing a lot more interest now also coming from healthcare companies. Now, healthcare doesn't necessarily need very high speeds or feeds. In fact, Cat4 is actually more than adequate for them. But what they need is a very reliable and mature solution that Sequans and Telit here provide. So we expect to see in 2021 actually a lot more growth coming from the segments that I mentioned, which was in the education side and the fixed deployment side, but also growth in the healthcare sector, if you will. And just to summarize quickly, Sequans is actually offering a very mature CBRS solution today through the extensive worldwide deployments and number of units shipped, and through our partnership with Telit on modules for private CBRS deployments. With our focus on being predominantly only on non-smartphone fixed wireless access applications, and having OnGo certification, we actually provide a extremely fast time to revenue for CBRS deployments here in the United States of America. So at this point, I'd like to hand this off to Dave from CBRS Alliance. Dave?
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. Appreciate it. And I'm just going to try to put a bow on a few things that have come up and talk specifically a little bit more about the vertical sectors and use cases that we're seeing for CBRS. And I just, again, want to thank Telit for the invitation to participate. Telit and Sequans are both, very important members of the Alliance, and so we're very glad to be here. Speaking of the Alliance, just for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are, actually this slide is already outdated. We are now 187 members, and this slide's only about a week old, so that tells you something about our growth trajectory. But if you look at the membership of the Alliance, I think it's really quite representative of both the size, but also the diversity of the opportunity that various companies and entities are seeing for CBRS. And, I think both Safi and Nick mentioned just the ecosystem that is formed. And it's, certainly my view as well, that we've proven out the flexibility, the adaptability of the solutions that have been developed for CBRS just based on the participation that you see here on the slide. And at a very high level, the focus for today's webinar is mostly around private applications. But if we take it up one level just to, at 30,000 foot view, what are the opportunities that people are seeing? They're certainly seeing opportunities around mobile broadband services. So you see all of the tier one mobile network operators, and Safi talked about their participation in the PAL auction. You see the MSOs, and again, Safi talked about their participation in the auction, looking to potentially roll out their own mobile broadband networks and not rely on the MVNO relationships with the mobile carriers. So that's the mobile broadband piece. Fixed wireless access is another very important and one of the leading applications and use cases for CBRS. So many companies deploying, again, rural fixed broadband, could be residential, could be small business services with the solutions. So fixed wireless, and then there's private. And in my mind, I tend to think of private deployments, in kind of enterprise and industrial applications at a high level. And both of those terms are frankly a little bit nebulous. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the enterprise spaces. I think Nick mentioned some of the utilities under the industrial category. Then you've got transportation and logistics, energy, all sorts of industrial private deployments. And then the final sort of high-level category is what we term in-building cellular coverage. So the idea being that you can use a CBRS network that you deploy in building, potentially initially deploy it for private internal communications, but then also leverage that same footprint to provide essentially inbound roaming or in-building roaming for the subscribers of the national mobile network operators. So think of it as a next generation distributed antenna system or DAS type of a solution. And so I think it's important just to highlight those four major categories of use cases, because it kind of speaks to the opportunity, it speaks to the ecosystem, and the fact that we have everybody from the mobile operators to the cable operators to the industrial players to the enterprises and systems integrators as well, driving the formation of this and helping to drive both the equipment ecosystem as well as the development of the standards and specifications. So with that, I'm actually going to gloss over that one, sorry, in the interest of time. A few of the, and again, I use the term loosely, enterprise use cases because it's such a broad category, but some of the leading enterprise use cases for private networks, in my opinion, would be healthcare, which have been especially, prevalent and sort of front and center during the pandemic. People using CBRS and OnGo solutions to support connectivity at pop-up testing and treatment centers is an example. Education is not on the slide, but that is another one where we're seeing a lot of deployments. There's a story, I think it was in Fierce Wireless, maybe light reading, last week talking about the Utah Education Network deploying CBRS solutions at about 180 different schools across Utah to provide better connectivity. And then I talked about the fixed wireless access. So moving on from here, it's been a busy year. This is a photo on the left from our initial commercial deployment launch event last September, which was held in DC. That's when we got the initial deployment authorization. Then January, we got the full commercial authorization. So really, it was late January. We've had full commercial operation in the GAA tier essentially for 9 months now. And in those 9 months, we've deployed, many tens of thousands of CBSDs or base stations, both Category A and Category B, both indoor and outdoor, and then really supporting the range of use cases that I talked about: mobile, fixed, private, and in-building cellular. The ecosystem continues to grow and expand rapidly. We now have over 100 different models of base stations that have been authorized by the FCC for the band. We've got about 138 client devices. That was a couple of weeks ago, that figure, so I wouldn't be surprised if we're over 140 now. 5 authorized SaaS administrators, almost 2,000 certified professional installers, and we've released our first technical specifications. That is, the Alliance released the first on-go specs supporting 5G new radio operation in the band. And I would just point out, that's obviously an important milestone. I do believe personally that most of the near-term private opportunity and activity is going to be around LTE solutions, simply based on the maturity of the specifications and the very robust hardware ecosystem that exists for LTE equipment in the band. But it's good to know that there's that growth path into NR going forward. Safi did a really good job on the PAL auctions. Just a couple of quotes here. Chairman Pai, he felt it was unequivocally a resounding success. And then another gentleman, Sasha Javed, who's the CEO at BitPath, saying that it had exceeded his most optimistic estimates. So those are some nice things to hear when you're involved in an auction. And there were just a couple things I thought I'd touch on very quickly. A lot of people were focusing in on this little rural county in West Texas called Loving. And Safi also mentioned that a lot of auctions are sort of gauged, one of the metrics that people use is the price per megahertz pop. I will say I'm not sure that's a great metric for an auction with such a diverse range of use cases and so many different bidders. I think price per megahertz pop is mostly a mobile broadband metric, and that's fine. But since it's what people typically use to gauge auctions, we're going to use it here. And on a price per megahertz pop basis, this Loving, Texas was the most expensive county in the country. Which is fascinating because there's they based the population numbers on the 2010 census, and there's about 80 people who live in this county, right? So that's why the price per megahertz pop is so high, is because there's so few people here. But as it turns out, this is all about really the petrochemical industry and the fact that there's a lot of oil production here. So 2 of the winning bidders, EOG and Oxy, are both in the oil industry. And then Wetterhorn, which is Dish, did get a license here. So just kind of an interesting factoid. And then the other one I was going to highlight is Arlington, Virginia. And again, you see some of the usual suspects. So Verizon got 2 PALs, Dish got a PAL. But then JBG Smith got 4 of the 7 PALs, which is really the limit for a single bidder. So that's the most any one entity could get. So they got 4 of them. And looking into that a little bit more, JBG is a property manager developer, and the company that's going to be developing the Amazon HQ2 project in Arlington. They're also very involved with the Virginia Tech Research Campus that's going in Arlington. So again, it kind of shows that we've got some unusual activity in the auction, and that really speaks again to the use cases and the diversity of those use cases. I'll just mention very briefly that I'm doing another webinar next Tuesday with Realcomm, which is a commercial real estate conference and organization. And we're going to have a speaker from JBG Smith actually on that panel. So if you're interested in learning more, please Google that or let me know, and I can send you the details. I mentioned that price per megahertz pop maybe isn't the best apples to apples, but it's what we have. And so I think, the fact that we came in at 21 cents national average for price per megahertz pop exceeded, and again, I should have attributed these last few slides. I think they had the BitPath logo, but these are Sasha Javid's slides. He presented them to the Alliance a few weeks ago at our member meeting, so I want to make sure I acknowledge that. But they certainly exceeded his expectations. I think they largely exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of how much money was raised. And, if you've been paying attention, you'll also note that the FCC just released the qualified bidders for the C-band auction, the 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz auction. That's going to be conducted December 8th, and it'll be very interesting to see where that comes in. Again, that's a little different. That's going to be cleared and exclusively licensed for higher power operation. So I do think we'll see higher prices there. But I think with that, that was what I was hoping to cover. And thank you all very much for the opportunity. Back to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Dave. And guys, we're going to jump right into questions here. I know we are coming up on the hour. And Dave, this first one is for you. Given the global, especially European efforts to support private LTE and 5G deployments, is the work the Alliance doing relevant to other countries? And how do we get to globally deployable solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Nick did a really good job sort of speaking to the fact that a lot of the chipsets, components, and then equipment, both infrastructure and client equipment that are being developed for this frequency range, right? They can address both the band 42, 43 opportunities in other parts of the world, and then band 48, which is the CBRS 3GPP band designation here in the States. So the fact that, and that certainly helped drive the equipment ecosystem, the fact that people were developing these solutions for the same frequency range in other countries and had been for some time. So yes, the work the Alliance is doing is certainly applicable. A lot of what we are doing is, how to deploy a private network, right? How do you get the numbering resources? That is the cellular identifiers, both on the RAN side as well as the MC blocks for the clients. If you're not a mobile network operator, because really up until now you've had to be a mobile network operator to secure cellular identifiers or resources. So, one of the things the Alliance has done is work with the group that does the North American numbering assignments, ATIS, and we've secured a block of identifiers that people can use for private deployments or neutral host deployments. So I think all of that kind of work, private network deployment guides, best practices, all of that applies in countries like Germany or the Netherlands or even potentially the UK, where they're opening up private networking opportunities in the 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz range. So we're the Alliance is focusing on CBRS. We think the most important thing to do is make CBRS a success here in the U.S., but we're also certainly monitoring the activity around the world, and we'd love to see how we can be helpful.
Great, thanks, Dave. We still have a large number of people live here, so I'm going to go through just a couple more questions. We keep hearing that CBRS is useful for first responders, but struggling to see how when they need connectivity in rural and remote areas, especially during wildfires. Those areas often don't have LTE coverage. So explain to us how CBRS can help in these situations.
I can take that, Amanda. This is Safi from Telit. So in one of my slides, I showed a picture of first responder use case. And essentially what you can imagine is a ruggedized case or like a brief case that has the entire network realized in a portable setting, which is battery operated. And so when these first responders enter a disaster area, they can set up a network by basically powering up a small cell and a small server. That's basically the server is going to realize all of the network components in a software-defined radio core network. And then the box, small cell box or a Class B device, a CBRS device, is going to do all of the physical layer and the RAN, and then they connect it to an antenna, and then basically they'll have, the coverage in that area. And then if they have the CBRS-enabled tablets, handset devices, or any other portable devices, they can basically connect over the eSIM or the second SIM in their phone that can basically be connected to this pop-up LTE network that will come up. So hopefully that explains how you can basically bring up your own private network in a disaster area very quickly. So that is the whole idea, that the deployment is very rapid and it can even be very ad hoc.
Great, thanks, Safi. Next question we have here is CBRS collaborating with other industry operator certification requirements to align their requirements?
Dave, do you want to take that, or want me to go?
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. I'm just trying to navigate to the question so I get the full context on it. But I mean, I think at the highest level, yes, we certainly work closely with, we've worked closely with WinForum. I mean, frankly, the CBRS Alliance OnGo certification is largely, based on the foundation that WinForum established in their working group 4 around certification and testing requirements. Then kind of going upstream, if you will, we work closely with 3GPP, RAN 4 there in terms of any band 48 particular testing requirements, certification requirements, and then we've worked, very closely with the FCC over a number of years, both the FCC and then also NTIA, DoD, and ITS, which is a subset of NTIA, which did a lot of the testing and certification of the both SAS and ESC systems. So yes, I think it's quite safe to say that the certification of OnGo products and solutions has been a multi-organizational effort spanning all these different groups.
Thanks, Dave. Nick, this one might be for you. Are the Telit and Sequans CBRS solutions compliant with 5G?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first and foremost, I guess it's important to understand that the solutions we're talking about are LTE solutions. So the network must support 4G and 5G. And typically the case is the spectrum is typically, as I said, shared between LTE and NR. So we expect that will be the case. Then when you move further down and you say that is the case, then the chipset that we have today is baseline release 10, 3GPP release 10, and we have actually implemented specific features from 3GPP release 14. For instance, CBRS carrier aggregation combinations with 2 carriers in both intra and interband have been defined in release 14 and are implemented on the Sequans chipset. So we've done a lot of these advanced release features that are important to our customers, and we continue adding those important releases that customers are asking for, and owning the stack and things I mentioned during my presentation is critical, and for us to be able to do that. So if there are requirements from our customers in order to customize the stack to suit their needs, to add features from release 14, even release 15, and things are important, then I would suggest the audience please contact either Telit or Sequans, and we can discuss how to bring some of these features specific to the market, to their requirements for them.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I know we are over on time for today, and I know that we did not get to answer all of the questions I got here in the inbox, but we will be sure to follow up with each of you individually. Please check your inboxes in the coming days for the slides and the replay link. I want to thank Safi, Nick, and Dave for presenting today, and thank you to all who joined us.